Welcome back, everyone. Today's deep dive is going to be a little, I don't know, thorny. We're getting into the moral status of animals.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, definitely. A lot of debate makes you think about some pretty fundamental stuff about us and, the world around us.
Exactly. And, our listener this time wants to understand this all, like, from a philosopher's perspective, like, what are the deeper arguments here, right?
Yeah, the real nitty-gritty.
The nitty-gritty, exactly. So we're going deep with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, their entry on the moral status of animals. Kind of a classic, right?
Yeah, foundational text really gives a good overview of, all the different positions and where the thinking's been over time on this.
So I guess the place to start is like, what even is moral status when we're talking
hmm
about, well, anything but in this case, animals.
Yeah.
It's not as obvious as it sounds, right?
Right, it really gets at this idea of moral consideration. Like, what kind of beings deserve our ethical attention? Can they be wronged? Do they have claims on us morally that we have to respect?
So it's beyond just being nice to animals. It's like, do they have actual rights? Or do we have duties towards them? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and for a long time, people just assumed it was humans, like only humans were in that category. But the Stanford Encyclopedia, right away, they're like, hold on a second. Just because something can't, say what its moral claims are, doesn't mean there aren't any, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, how would a baby argue for its rights? But we know babies matter morally. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's where speciesism comes in. This idea that, Peter Singer compares it to racism. Like, just as skin color isn't morally relevant, your species shouldn't automatically make you morally superior.
So just because we're human, it doesn't make us like morally better than a dog or whatever.
Right, right. Which kind of challenges this whole thing of human exceptionalism, the idea that we've got these unique qualities and that gives us this special status.
I can see where that comes from, though. Like, we have language. We build spaceships. We have, complicated societies. Like, it's easy to feel we're different from the rest of the animal world.
Sure, sure. But the Stanford Encyclopedia, they bring up all these examples of how a lot of the things we think are only human traits actually show up in other animals, often in pretty sophisticated ways. Like orangutans, they have these family bonds, like mothers and young. They stay close for years, even after the kids grow up.
So it's beyond just sticking together to survive. Like, there's actual emotional connection there. Real family stuff.
Exactly. And that level of social complexity, it's not what we expect from, non-human animals. Or think about social problem solving, which isn't just a primate thing either. Studies show chickens, horses, they get their social hierarchies and they can work within those pretty subtly.
So they're not just acting on instinct. There's some thinking going on, some strategizing.
Yeah.
Throws a wrench in the idea that only humans are super smart socially, right?
And then there's grief even. Coyotes, elephants, even killer whales, they show what looks a lot like grief when they lose someone. Like real deep emotion, the kind we assume is just, a human thing.
So all these examples, they're like blurring the lines between us and other animals, like this whole human exceptionalism thing. It's not so clear cut, is it?
Yeah.
So then where do we go from there? If it's not just about being human, how do we figure out who gets moral consideration?
Yeah, good question. And one of the ways philosophers have tried to tackle this is with this idea of personhood as a marker for who matters morally.
Okay, personhood, let's get into that. I know that's tied to this idea of rationality, right? Being self-aware, all that.
Right. The Stanford Encyclopedia talks about Kant. He was big on this. He said rational beings, they're ends in themselves. They have value. Just because they can reason sets them apart from things that are just tools.
So because we can think, that gives us special moral status, according to Kant. And there's a more recent philosopher, Korsgaard, who kind of takes this idea further, right?
Yeah, Korsgaard, she focuses on this thing she calls the problem of normativity. It's like humans, we can reflect on what we want and decide if that's a good enough reason to actually do something. We can be like, okay, I'm angry, but should I really punch this person?
We have this ability to step back, look at our own motivations, and make choices based on bigger principles, right? But how do we know animals can't do that? At least a little bit. Is there even a way to test that in a lab?
That's really tough to say for sure. I mean, we're learning more and more about how smart animals are, but yeah, how much they're self-aware, it's still a debate.
It makes you wonder if this whole personhood thing as the only way to figure out moral status, it might be too limited. Even with humans, there are people who don't fit that neatly.
That's the problem of marginal cases, which is a big part of what the Stanford Encyclopedia gets into. They're talking about Humans who don't, like, fit our usual idea of a person, babies, people in comas, folks with severe mental disabilities.
Right, so if being a person is the key, what are we saying about those people? They don't get moral consideration. Doesn't seem right.
Yeah, so the article talks about how philosophers have tried to deal with this. First, there's Kant. He said we have this indirect moral consideration for non-persons. It's not like we owe it to them directly, but mistreating them makes us worse people.
So it's about our own morals, not really about the other being's worth. Kind of a roundabout way of getting there.
Yeah, and that's been criticized. Like, it doesn't really acknowledge the wrong that's done to the non-person. Like, if you hurt a baby, it's not just about you being a bad person. The baby was still harmed, regardless.
Right, exactly. Makes sense. So what's another way they've tried to address this?
Well, there's this philosopher, Alan Wood. He says moral consideration, it should go to anything with rational nature, even if it's not fully developed yet.
So like potential for rationality.
Yeah.
Like a baby could become rational, so they count.
Yeah.
Even though they aren't like debating philosophy right now.
Yeah. Or someone in a coma, they used to be rational. So maybe there's still something there that matters.
Interesting. But it's still all about rationality, huh? Which I'm guessing some folks, especially the animal rights people, probably have problems with.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So that leads us to Tom Regan. He's another philosopher. He says, forget about rational nature. We should focus on the similarities between humans and other animals. That's what matters.
Like what kind of similarities is he talking about?
Well, he says it's this capacity to experience life, to have your own individual life that matters, regardless of what species you are. That's the basis for being morally considerable.
So a dog, maybe they don't think like us, but their life is important to them. They have their own wants and feelings and stuff.
Yeah, and focusing on that ability to experience, it brings us to another key idea in this whole animal ethics thing. Sentience.
Okay, sentience, that's like being able to feel.
Right.
Like pleasure, pain, happiness, sadness, all that.
Exactly. And there's this great quote from Jeremy Bentham. He was a utilitarian philosopher. He said, the question isn't, can they reason or can they talk? It's, can they suffer?
That really gets to it, huh? It's not about doing what we do. It's about whether they feel right.
Right. And that's a big deal for utilitarians. They say sentience, that's what gives you moral status. Peter Singer, another utilitarian, he's like, if something can suffer, we can't just exclude them from our moral calculations. It's not fair.
So if an animal can feel pain, their pain matters as much as ours, basically.
Yeah, and it's cool because our scientific understanding of sentience, it's always changing. Like now we're looking at fish, cephalopods, even insects. Like, could they be sentient?
So it's like the circle of who we need to think about morally, it's getting wider and wider, right? And that brings up another question, like, okay, so we figure out who matters, but then how much does it matter? Like, what are we obligated to do for these beings?
That's where we move from who counts to what do we owe them. And there we get into these two big frameworks, animal rights and utilitarianism. Those are the big players in the debate.
Oh, okay, the showdown. Animal rights versus utilitarianism. I'm ready for this. But I think we've done a lot already, given everyone a lot to chew on. Maybe a good spot to pause, let it sink in.
All right, so yeah, let's get back to these two big ethical ideas, right? Animal rights and utilitarianism.
Yeah, like both say animals matter, but they go in different directions from there. So break it down for us. What are the big differences?
Okay, so animal rights, it's really focused on the individual animal and saying they have inherent worth. Like, it's not just that they're useful to us, it's that they have value on their own, just by existing.
So not how they help us or what we get from them, but their own right to, I don't know, live a good life, however that looks for a cow or a pig or whatever, right?
Exactly. And because of that, because they have this worth, the animal rights view says using them as just a tool, a means to our ends, that's wrong, period. Even if we get some good outcome.
Like, even if we could, I don't know, cure cancer by testing on a bunch of mice, the rights folks would say, nope, can't do that, because it's using those mice as tools, even if it saves human lives.
Right. They'd say the mice have a right not to be used that way, no matter what.
Huh, okay. So utilitarianism, it's different, right? I know it's all about the consequences, like what actually happens as a result of what we do.
Utilitarianism is big on maximizing well-being overall. So less about inherent rights, more about like looking at the result and saying, okay, what causes the least harm and the most good for everyone?
So like adding up all the happiness and suffering, both human and animal, and choosing the path that, I don't know, tips the scales toward good, basically.
Right. And it's not just human happiness we're counting. Utilitarians, they factor in all sentient beings.
Okay, that's important, yeah. So how would these two views play out with, I don't know, something really concrete like factory farming? Those seem like they'd have totally different takes on that.
Oh, absolutely. Animal rights people, they look at factory farming and they're like, this whole thing is wrong from the get-go. You
Mm.
know, it's confining animals, doing painful stuff to them, basically taking away their chance to live a natural life, whatever that means for a chicken, you know?
Yeah, it's all about efficiency and profit, not the animals themselves, right? So
Right.
rights folks are like, nope, that system's just unethical.
Yeah, it's built on exploitation, they'd say. Utilitarians, though, they come at it differently.
How so? I think they'd still be pretty concerned, right?
Yeah, they care about the suffering for sure, all that pain those animals are going through. But they also think about, like, well, cheap meat, that's good for a lot of humans. And if we shut down factory farms, that's a huge economic shift, you know?
So it's like balancing the bad for the animals against the good for people and the whole ripple effect on society, right?
Exactly. And that can lead to some tough calls. Like a utilitarian might say, yeah, factory farms, as they are now, super bad. But just ending it all at once, that could backfire, have all these unintended consequences. So maybe they'd push for a slower change, you know, towards more humane farming.
It's almost like with utilitarianism, sometimes it's less clear what the right thing is. It's more situational.
It can be, yeah. And even within utilitarianism, there's arguments about like how much weight you give different types of happiness and suffering and how you think about the long-term effects. But the goal is always the same: less suffering, more overall good.
Okay, that makes sense. So how about something like, I don't know, animal research? That's got to be a big one where these views clash, right?
Huge one. For animal rights folks, most research is a no-go. It's using the animal for our benefit, no matter how much it helps us. They say that violates their basic rights.
Yeah, tough to argue with that when you think about all the medical stuff we've learned from animal studies. But I get it. It's about respecting each animal, not just what's good for humans overall.
Right. Utilitarians, though, you know how they roll. They'll acknowledge the suffering and research, but then they'll say, okay, but what are the potential benefits? Could this save human lives down the line?
So they might say, yeah, some animal research is okay if the good that comes out of it is big enough.
Right. They'd say under certain conditions it might be justified, but they'd still want to minimize suffering, find alternatives when possible, you know, not just be cruel about it.
So it's complicated, huh? Putting these ideas into practice, it's not just black and white, a lot of gray areas.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole debate so interesting. It really gets you thinking about, like, what is our relationship to animals? And what are we allowed to do ethically, you know?
We're not off the hook yet, though. I know the Stanford Encyclopedia, they don't just stop at animal rights and utilitarianism.
Yeah.
There are other ways of looking at all this, right? Like ones that kind of challenge some of the assumptions we've been making.
Yeah, for sure. Some philosophers, they're like, okay, all this talk about rationality and sentience and calculating consequences, it's missing something. Like, it's too cold, you know? Doesn't really capture how we feel about animals, how we relate to them.
Yeah, like we're turning them into numbers and a math problem, not living beings we share the world with.
Yeah.
So what are some of these other approaches?
Yeah, well, there's virtue ethics. It's about becoming a good person, not just following rules. People like Rosalind Hursthouse and Cora Diamond, they're big on this.
So it's not what's the right thing to do,
Hmm.
is what kind of person do I want to be?
Exactly. They say we need to cultivate compassion, empathy, kindness, all that towards all living things.
Like building good habits of being, and then the right actions kind of flow naturally from that.
Right. Like Hursthouse, she tells this story about how she realized over time that eating meat just didn't fit with her love for nature and how she saw animals as smart and feeling.
So it wasn't like someone convinced her with an argument. It was more like her whole view shifted, and then her actions followed.
Yeah. And that leads us to this other idea, moral landscapes. That's cool too.
Okay, moral landscapes hit me.
The Stanford Encyclopedia, they talk about this philosopher, Alice Crary. She says, all these things we use to judge what's moral, they're actually shaped by our own moral landscape, like all our background beliefs and values and assumptions, you know?
So we don't come into this stuff neutral. We've already got all this baggage from how we were raised, what our culture's like, all that.
Exactly. And that baggage, it could include stuff like speciesism, obviously, or just thinking humans are the center of everything. And we might not even realize it's there. You know, it's just how we see the world.
So if we already think humans are more important, it's going to be hard to have a fair conversation about how animals matter.
Right. Query says we got to be more aware of that, like, okay, am I really thinking clearly about this, or is my own bias getting in the way?
Like we got to do some inner work before we can even have the ethical debate, huh?
Yeah, good way to put it. And then there's feminist philosophy. They bring a whole other perspective to this, too. The Stanford Encyclopedia points out a lot of feminist thinkers, they're not super into these traditional ways of doing ethics, all focused on logic and abstract ideas.
Like they're saying feelings matter too.
Yeah, they say things like empathy and care. Those are crucial for understanding our obligations to others, whether it's a human or another animal.
So it's about actually feeling what they feel, get in their shoes, understanding they're vulnerable, they need our compassion, all that.
Right. And a lot of times, feminist perspectives, they're not so focused on the individual, like most ethical theories.
So they're looking at the bigger picture, like how are we all connected, not just
Mhm.
what does each animal deserve on its own.
Yeah, they're big on the importance of relationships, how our lives are tied together, and what that means for our responsibilities.
It's like we're not just separate beings, we're all part of this web of life, right? We need each other, we depend on each other, that kind of thing.
Right, and that leads to this idea of entangled empathy, which is really interesting. Laurie Gruen, she's a philosopher who writes a lot about this.
Okay, entangled empathy, I'm all ears.
So it's like a deeper kind of empathy. It's not just feeling bad for a dog that's hurt. It's actually trying to understand their perspective, their needs, what they're going through, but also seeing how, like, bigger systems of power and stuff might be hurting them.
So like not just feeling their pain, but understanding where it comes from, maybe how our own actions contribute to it, all that.
Yeah, it's about understanding our own role in the systems that cause animal suffering, being honest about that.
So entangled empathy, it's not just a feeling, it's kind of a way of being, of seeing the world differently and then acting on that.
Right. And Gruen says when you really have that kind of empathy, it should make you do something, change how you live.
Right. Wow, that's a lot to take in. It feels like it pulls together all the stuff we've been talking about. We went from really basic questions like, can animals feel? Do they count as persons? All the way to these really big picture ideas about being good people, seeing the world in a different way, understanding how we're all connected.
And the thing is, there's no easy answer to the moral status question. It's a conversation that keeps going, and it makes us rethink how we fit into the world and what we owe to the other beings we share it with.
I definitely feel like I've got a better grasp on how complicated this all is. But what about our listener out there, the one who's coming at this as a philosopher? Like, what are they walking away with? What questions are they going to be chewing on after all this?
Well, the Stanford Encyclopedia, they end by asking this really provocative question, and I think it's the perfect one for a philosopher to wrestle with. They say, what if moral consideration, it doesn't stop at sentience? What if agency matters too?
Okay, so we've talked a lot about sentience, that ability to feel and experience stuff. But agency, that's different, right?
It is. Agency is about being able to act on purpose, to make choices, go after what you want. It's like having some control over what you do, being a bit self-determined.
So not just feeling happy or sad, but having some say in what happens in your own life.
Exactly. And some philosophers are saying maybe agency itself is a reason to give something moral consideration, even if it's not sentient in the usual way.
That's wild. It's like widening the circle even more to things we haven't even thought of, maybe. Like, what kind of things were we talking about here?
Well, it could be. Like certain AI, artificial intelligence, if they get to a point where they can make their own decisions, act on their own.
Whoa, that's a whole other can of worms. Like,
Yeah.
do our current ethical ideas even work for that?
It's a big challenge. And the article, it also mentions, like, maybe ecosystems deserve moral consideration or even the whole biosphere.
So not just individual animals, but whole communities of creatures, or even the planet itself.
Yeah, if agency, that ability to act and kind of shape your own fate, if that matters morally, then maybe those bigger entities have some kind of claim on us too.
That is a huge shift in how we think about things.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just protecting this animal from being hurt, it's respecting the whole natural world's ability to, I don't know, do its thing, exist as it is.
It's pretty humbling when you think about it. Makes you rethink our whole place in the universe and how careful we got to be with what we do.
For sure. And I think that's a good spot to take a breather.
Yeah.
We've gone deep on sentience, utilitarianism, animal rights, all that. But then we've also got these even bigger ideas to think about now.
Yeah, we've got virtue, moral landscapes, entangled empathy, and now this agency thing on top of it. A lot to ponder.
Definitely. And I think that's a perfect cliffhanger to leave our listeners on. They've got their homework now, right?
Okay.
Okay, so we've really gone deep on this, huh? Sentience, personhood, all these different ways of thinking about how animals fit into our ethical world.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And I think what we're seeing is this question of moral status. It's not like there's one right answer that's going to, solve everything. It's more like an ongoing conversation. We keep learning, keep reevaluating how we see our place in the natural world and how we treat other beings.
It's about being open to changing our minds, basically.
Hmm.
As we learn more about animals, about different ways of, I don't know, experiencing the world, we got to be willing to adjust our ethics too.
Right. And the Stanford Encyclopedia, it doesn't give us like a rule book, but it does give us these tools for thinking about this stuff in a really, rigorous way.
Like a philosophical toolkit, right?
Yeah.
And then it's up to us to figure out how to use those tools.
Exactly. So we've got animal rights, utilitarianism. We saw how those work, what their strengths are, where they maybe fall short.
And then those other perspectives like becoming more virtuous people, understanding our own biases, having that deeper entangled empathy.
And of course, this huge question that we ended on last time about agency. Does that matter for moral status? That's really pushing the boundaries of how we think about this.
Yeah, this idea that things that might not even feel the way we do, like ecosystems or even the whole planet, maybe they deserve moral consideration too, because they can, in a way, act and shape their own fate.
That's a big one to wrap our heads around. So, for our listener out there, the philosopher who's been on this deep dive with us, what's I don't know, the big takeaway here?
What do they do with all this?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing is this isn't the end of the road. It's like the starting point. It's about keeping this conversation going in your own head. Keep questioning, keep exploring, keep challenging your own assumptions.
Because there's always more to learn, right?
Hmm.
About animal cognition, about different ways of being in the world. And as we learn, our ethics have to keep pace with that.
And those ethical frameworks, they can't stay static. We got to be willing to tweak them, update them as we get new information, as we have these conversations with each other, and really listen to different points of view.
It's not always going to be comfortable,
Yeah.
right? To have our views challenged. But it's good for us, I think, to be able to step outside our usual way of seeing things and consider like a broader perspective.
Absolutely. And as you keep thinking about all this, I'd say try to bring it down to earth too. Like, how do these philosophical ideas actually play out in your life, your choices, how you interact with the natural world?
Yeah, what does it mean to live ethically in a world full of so many different kinds of beings? What kind of person do you want to be in that world? And what is your relationship with, I don't know, animals, with nature as a whole?
Mhm.
What does that look like in a way that feels right to you?
Those are tough questions, but they're the kind of questions that philosophers have been asking forever. And each of us has to find our own answers if we want to live a life that's meaningful, ethical, all of that.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. This has been a fascinating exploration, to say the least, and we hope it's given you a lot to think about.
Thanks for being here with us, everyone.
And until next time, keep those philosophical wheels turning.